Amazing scenes in Moscow yesterday. One last thing about this. Shows you exactly why Russia's invasion of Ukraine looks like it was planned by absolute morons. In fact, makes you think all Russia's in fact driven right now into the ground by the most stupid liars on the planet. Now, this started when Putin, the president, announced his spies had foiled an evil Ukrainian assassination plot against his favourite journalist, a sycophant who night after night calls for Ukraine to be smashed.
Федеральной службы безопасности пресечена деятельность террористической группы, которая планировала нападение и убийство одного из известных российских тележурналистов. Конечно, сейчас будут от этого открещиваться, но факты и доказательства неопровержимы.
The evidence is irrefutable. In fact, it's straight out of Get Smart. Now, the strange thing is we never actually got to saw the faces of the so-called Ukrainian assassination squad as they're allegedly being arrested. And the evidence of this plot that the Russian spy agency, FSB, claims to have found turns out to be utterly hilarious. It seems that someone actually told the FSB's goons, look, set it up. We want you to plant Nazi memorabilia because the president says Ukrainians are Nazis. We also want you to plant a wig to make them look like spies. And we want a book that's got an inscription that's in extremist language with an illegible signature, and throw in 3 SIM cards to make them all look a bit shifty, okay? Well, you won't believe how the spies followed those orders. Yes, they claim they found a Hitler poster on the assassination squad, check, and also a Nazi t-shirt, check, obviously straight out of a rapper, plus a wig, green for some strange reason. Then above the black shirt, you see 3 copies of The Sims, not SIM cards, The Sims, a family-friendly video game, evidence of terrorism. And on the right of that shirt, you see a book with, yes, it does have a bloodthirsty inscription with a signature exactly like the bosses ordered. Signature illegible. In fact, that's what those circled words actually say in Russian. Signature illegible. Just what you asked for, boss. I mean, what a joke. If even Russia's spies are this brain dead, you'd have to think that Putin's regime is a clown show from top to bottom. Where do you draw the line where it's gone from good manners, we got to jump down someone's throat for being, just off the planet, and cancel culture?
Well, I think the problem that's emerged in the last few years, last decade really, it's started in America and it's come to Australia, it's come to the UK, and I think it's a very insidious attack on democracy, actually, because what's happened is you've got the development of social media, and it's empowered a group of people, mainly young, they skew very woke, very self-righteous, pretty joyless individuals, but they're very well organised on social media, and they've got it into their heads that they're allowed to dictate to the rest of us how we lead our lives, that they can tell us what we're allowed to find funny, what comedians are acceptable, what movies and TV shows we can like, what statues we can revere, what parts of history we should be personally ashamed about, and so on. And they're not just content with expressing their opinions. If anyone dares to counter that opinion, then they want to shame and vilify them and cancel them. So this cancel culture does exist. It operates at high level, at low level. You see teachers being cancelled for expressing opinions. You see people in publishing companies, media companies, in banks and so on. And it's got to stop, Andrew, because the bedrock of any democracy should be that we all are entitled to our honestly held opinion. And the day we lose that, we're not a democracy. We become a totalitarian state like Russia or North Korea or China, where opinions are criminalised. That's not where we should be going. But that's where the cancel culture mob are taking us.
These so-called climate independents, especially this one, Monique Ryan, standing against Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and the wealthy electorate of Kooyong in Victoria. Now, I don't think that anyone has checked out the very dangerous thing that she and the other so-called climate independents, all backed by Simon Holmes Court, billionaire's son, are pushing. I'm amazed it hasn't come out. And this is important because the polls show that we're headed probably for a Labor government that relies on the so-called climate independents to form government. These independents will have the power to say to Labor, do what we say or else. Monique Ryan, who last year claimed she'd never been political before, not even in university, never. She was a political clean skin, when in fact, as has now come out, she'd been a Labor Party member for years. And now she, like the other climate independents, claims she doesn't know who she'd vote for. A Labor Prime Minister, a Liberal one, if she had the balance of power.
And I'm prepared to work with either sides of the political spectrum. Neither of them is good enough.
No, doesn't have an idea who she'd vote for. Even though she's campaigning against a Liberal, and even though she was a Labor member, and even though her policies are way to the left of even Labor. Total mystery. And speaking of her policies, let me look at her main one, because this is actually the big scam. This is the big con. People have got to wake up to what is going to happen. Monique Ryan, this climate independent, says she wants even bigger cuts to her emissions than Labor wants. 60% by 2030. That's just 8 years from now. And that's an incredible target. And today, even an ABC presenter, even a real global warming believer like Patricia Karvelis, had to ask a question about this. Is it recklessly ignorant or dishonest answer that she got?
We don't know what your plan entails, how it would cost the economy, who would pay.
That's not at all true, actually, Patricia. So I'm supportive of Zed Seselja's Climate Change Action Bill, which is ready to go. We could have effective action on climate change in this country within the next 6 months if independents such as myself are able to have that bill brought to Parliament and passed after the next federal election.
Okay, what is in this really sound, robust, magic plan of Zed Seselja's that's going to cut our emissions by this amazing 60% by just 2030 and not cost us a cent, not a cent?
You know, we will benefit from action on climate change. It's not going to cost us.
Well, I was all agog. I thought, wow, if it's that easy, why isn't everyone doing it? But then today, I actually read that Zed Seselja bill from top to bottom. And these climate independents, they are conning you. It's just unbelievable. I've read every word of the Seselja plan. There is not a single line in there about how this 60% cut is actually going to be done. Now, one thing really stuck in my craw about this debate on whether the Morrison government did enough to stop China making a security deal with the Solomon Islands, which is serious stuff. I mean, there's a possible Chinese military base, maybe going to be built one day, 2,000 kilometres from our coast. But this is how Labor yesterday belted the government by mocking the ethnic name of the minister that the government had sent to those islands 2 weeks ago to talk to their strangely prickly Prime Minister and ask why on earth he was doing this. It's our Minister for the Pacific, Zed Seselja. And this was clearly a coordinated mockery of his name by Labor.
And they send some bloke called Zed. Who's Zed? Is this Pulp Fiction or national security?
Australia's response was not to send any serious delegation. They sent Senator Zed Seselja. Every time I hear Zed, I just think about Pulp Fiction.
Well, that insult was then retweeted by another Labor MP, Josh Burns. Who's Zed? With a link to Jason Clare's so-called joke about the name. Well, joining me is Senator Zed Seselja. Labor obviously coordinated this to make fun of your name. You had Anthony Albanese and Jason Clare both telling the same lame joke about your Croatian name. I'm just wondering, did you find that offensive? I mean, do they make jokes about names like Wong as well and Chow? I mean, where does this stop?
Well, look, Andrew, it's a fair point. I thought it was pretty low rent. I thought it was clearly coordinated, and they thought it was funny or something, and I don't know exactly who they were playing to, but I mean, those of us who have grown up, you know, being called Wog and have funny names, as I do, Zdenko Zeselja, and it's been shortened to Zed, you know, unfortunately, you're probably pretty used to that in the schoolyard. But, you know, in political debate, I took it as a sign that all of the other arguments they'd made in the space had completely fallen flat. I mean, they made the argument about aid. We demonstrated we've significantly upped our aid to the Pacific. They talked about climate change. Well, the deal is with the world's largest emitter, and then they decided instead to focus on me and focus on my name being a bit different. But you'd have to say, Andrew, that if my name was Dave or Steve, they wouldn't have they wouldn't have made the same joke, and certainly wouldn't have, been asking those questions. And I think if the shoe was on the other foot, if it was Liberals talking about Labor MPs and doing it in relation to their ethnic names, I suspect they would be expressing a fair degree of outrage. So yeah, pretty low rent stuff, what we've come to expect from the Labor Party, particularly when they're out of answers on policy.
Labor's plan to stop China from building military bases in our region is to train more Pacific Island troops, which we do already, do even more about global warming, we're ready to do too much, I think, spend $130 million a year more on aid and broadcast the hard-left ABC into the region. Do you think that's going to stop China, boom, dead in its tracks?
No, Andrew, I don't think it'll have any effect at all. I mean, most of it is kind of harmless, a little bit of extra aid to the Pacific, in itself, there's nothing really wrong with that. I absolutely disagree with the Labor Party that climate change has played any role in this whatsoever, because the biggest emitter in the world is China. If your motivation was climate change, you wouldn't be getting into bed with China. But having said all that, I think Labor's policy is kind of harmless. It's just sort of, it's just more of the same. It's, whatever the government's doing plus $500 million more over 4 years. The only bit of the ABC which the Pacific Islanders really like is the rugby league and rugby union games. Those programs, if you broadcast more rugby league and rugby union, that would really be popular.
Anzac Day today. It was different. It's been changed in an important way. And I think the war in Ukraine has done that. Now, the crowds were back this year in most places after 2 years of COVID restrictions, although not in Western Australia. They were back to honour the Australians who died in war, fighting not just for our safety, but for our values and our freedoms. And today that last part was underlined because for 2 months we've seen Ukrainians fight and die for their values, fight against insane odds to beat the Russian invasion to stay free, when many in the West thought the price would be too high for them. It would be safer just to surrender or to flee. The US even offered its president a flight to safety. Now, Anzac Day, it was actually gone through some phases. In World War I, for instance, we lost 60,000 dead. It was a slaughterhouse, but just one of the men who died overseas was brought home during the war for burial. The rest were buried where they fell. Gallipoli, Europe, and few of the family back home could afford to travel all that way back then and stand over their graves. So Anzac Day was where they did their remembering and where they grieved. But later then, another change. In the 60s and 70s, memories of the two world wars then dimming, things changed. Anzac Day was about the sacrifice, yes, but a lot of people said it was actually about the sheer uselessness of war. But today, Anzac Day, with Ukraine, we're reminded that yes, war is horrible, it's evil. But sometimes when war is visited on you, when men with guns come to take away your freedom, taking up arms can actually be noble, and some things are worth going to war for. Anthony Albanese, Labor leader, he's been off the campaign trail this week, sick with COVID, and actually doing very few radio interviews too. He could do them from home, but he did one with Ray Hadley that didn't turn out so positive so I think the sickbed is the safest place for him. So I'm not sure his absence has actually hurt Labor. In fact, am I being unkind to say, when I see campaign spokesman Jason Clare taking over the press conference for Labor, and well, I think he's done a better job. He looks more in command. What do you think?
I think he's a better media performer, but maybe he hasn't got the grasp of policy detail, and they reckon he hasn't got the mongrel to run. So we'll see eventually if Labor don't get in power whether that's the case. But in terms of Albanese, the issue with this election, Andrew, it seems to me, a lot of people want an excuse to vote against Scott Morrison, but Anthony Albanese hasn't given them that excuse. So the more they see of Morrison, and they saw more this week because Albanese was laid low, the worse it gets for the government. The more they see of Albanese, the more the government has a chance. So government people have actually told me that they're quite happy that Albanese's back on the trail next week, and isn't that fascinating? I've never seen it before. But it is, I suppose, shades of the American campaign with Joe Biden to an extent.
Joining me is Ross Greenwood, Sky News business editor and host of Business Now. Ross, what caused this inflation?
Well, pretty basically, and that is that the price of goods are rising. Now, I can take you through some of those goods that are rising. The ordinary person actually knows. If you've been to a supermarket, if you've been shopping, if you've filled up your petrol tank, you know. In the past quarter to the end of March, the price of fuel was up by 11%. Now, since then, it has come back a little bit. The price of beef, so steak, up by 7%, 7.5%. The price of soft drinks and juices, the things that ordinary people buy in their groceries, up more than 5%. Fruit, up by 5%. Even, and this is the basics of life, right? Even paper towel. So this is toilet paper. This is paper towel, up by 6.7%. So if the Reserve Bank and the government imagined that there was no inflation coming, they clearly have not been shopping. They are not living in the real world, which raises question marks about why, in fact, they're going to be forced to act now and play catch up, risking the economy when they could have actually been on top of this some 6 months ago.
A Chinese Australian in Hong Kong, friend of a friend, has been getting emails forwarded to them with video absolutely bagging Prime Minister Scott Morrison. I checked in a couple of the videos that have been sent, like this one.
Hello, 大家好，又係我高 B 哥啊。
Now, it's made by a pro-Beijing influencer in Hong Kong, calling himself Brother Gao B, who says the Australian election, double standard again. He's talking about a secret security deal China signed last week with the Solomon Islands. Morrison said that the military base in the Solomon Islands is a red line. So, Ukraine's entry into NATO is Russia's bottom line. Well, that's the communist China response too, you know, whatever Russia's doing in Ukraine. The West is worse, guilty of double standards. Another video, again, attacks Morrison for being against this deal. That could create actually a Chinese military base on the Solomons, just 1,600 kilometres from Australia. And this time he says, Morrison tumbled due to the Solomon Islands incident. Will the Australian election in May be reversed? It means the government being thrown out. Well, each of these videos so far had between 50 and 65,000 views and growing. And in an electorate like Chisholm in Victoria, that could make a huge difference. Because 20% of the people there are ethnic Chinese. Many speak Cantonese. And that electorate, Liberal held, is right on the knife edge, right on it. Now, the person getting these videos sent to them, and other videos too, they're wondering, is this part of a Chinese social media campaign against the Morrison government? Join me on Trending Now is Daisy Cousins, a Sky News contributor and YouTube star with her own video channel. What can you tell us about this site?
Well, this influencer, Andrew, has actually proved to be quite elusive. I sort of had a look at him this afternoon. He doesn't actually pop up in a Google search, which is quite interesting. And he also doesn't really seem to be on any other forms of Western media. I can't find him on Twitter or Instagram, which is sort of unusual because YouTubers tend to be cross-platform. But he's very, very much focused on YouTube. And you know, looking at his About section and stuff, he seems to be what you'd call a citizen journalist. And certainly some of the comments on these anti-Morrison videos were congratulating him and thanking him for his apparent impartiality and nuance. So he seems to be quite popular. He has a not insignificant number of subscribers either. He's got about 216,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is a few thousand more subscribers than I have. And as you said, the videos are racking up significant views, 50 or 60,000. That is quite a chunk. And although it's hard to tell much about him, what we can tell is that this election stuff, the Australian election, seems to be doing well for his site. There's a website called Social Blade, which stores YouTuber data, so views, subscriber growth, all of that sort of thing. And what I checked out his Social Blade profile, and it seems that for the last sort of year or so, his views and subscribers have kind of plateaued along. But just in the last couple of months, February to March, there's been this sudden uptick in subscribers and views, which of course coincides very much with the ramping up of election rhetoric in Australia. So whether he's getting paid or not, I mean, and obviously he says he's not, he's doing well out of this kind of stuff. So if the coalition knows about it, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I'm sure that they'd be quite worried because this is an influencer with a significant enough reach and enough people interested in this content and obviously who enjoy this content, hence the praise. The Chinese vote is very large. And as you say, it could tip the scales of power. I find it all so fascinating.